Japan, unlike most countries, doesn't have a housing shortage. It actually has a housing surplus. The average home, this is between both apartments and houses, is only 65 square meters. Tokyo is actually one of the cheapest places to live. Japan in the 1970s was in 2000, and it is still in 2000 these days. Japanese people make up almost 98%.
Welcome to Unpacking Japan. I'm Toby, and today sitting here with Alex.
Hey, how you doing?
Thank you for coming. You're a real estate agent in Tokyo. You've been here for quite a while. You established your agency and started a YouTube channel to kind of highlight properties in Japan, but not any kind of properties. You specialize on a high-end market. Mm-hmm. So you've visited a lot of really interesting places, and we're going to get into that. But let's go back a few years. What brought you to Japan in the first place?
That's a good question. I'm not like most people where it's like, oh, I'm into anime or into manga or whatever, video games or anything like that. I came over here on vacation one time. It was probably 2007, 2008, something like that. And I have been to a lot of other countries. And to be honest, I had never really seen anything like Japan in anywhere else that I've been, right? So just in good ways, right? And I thought to myself, I might want to live here in the future. So I decided to try that out. I did a study abroad in high school, did that for a year in Fukuoka, did another study abroad in college, again in Fukuoka. And I was like, yeah, this is where I'm going to be living. Yeah.
Nice.
So yeah, just one thing led to another. Here I am, 10 years later.
Do you remember like your first impression? You're originally from California, is that
That's
correct?
right, yeah.
Your first impression of coming to Japan, and like what was it that really hooked you a little bit into coming back?
Just how everything works like it should. If they say, oh, the trains are going to come at whatever time, they actually come at whatever time. And, you know, the food is always good in most places, right?
Yeah, I haven't really been disappointed here yet.
Yeah, I mean, I've had little, stomach aches every once in a while, but I don't think that's the fault of them. And also, yeah, I don't know. It's just how everything is as it should be. That's what it seems like to me.
Yeah, Japan is really one place where you know pretty much what you're getting into, and there's not really that many surprises after, right? The system is how it is, and it works how it's supposed to do.
Yeah, and also it's safe. I mean, I'm sure you've talked about this on the pod before, but it's the only place where you can leave your laptop open in a Starbucks and just go to the bathroom, come back, it'll be there. Leave your wallet there, it'll be there with all of its money in it. You can't do that anywhere else. No. It's insane.
And so coming back a few times to Japan and deciding to settling here, when or what was it that got you into real estate?
Yeah, so I was originally in a completely different industry. I started off in media.
Okay.
So I started off working at a magazine company. After that, I worked in an American movie company in Japan, toward basically selling movie and TV shows to Japanese people. And when it was announced that that company was going to be bought out by another one, didn't want to work there. So when I was thinking what to do, I saw that there was a niche that had not been met. So specifically if you know Tokyo at all, there's a place called Nakameguro. I was like, there's a lot of people who want to live over here that don't speak Japanese. I, at the time, could speak Japanese as well. So I was thinking, okay, you know what? I'm going to try to be the guy that helps them find the right kind of places. And just one thing led to another, got into a company back then. And have been doing it for about 5 or 6 years now. Yeah.
And how does it work in Japan now? Real estate is usually quite specific because you're selling property, you're selling land, so you give ownership to like a part of a country. So usually that implies having certain licenses and such. When you got into this, what was the process? Could you just apply for any real estate job at an agency, or did you have to?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you're from all over Europe, it seems. You're not quite from Germany, you're not quite from France. I don't know where you're from exactly. But in a lot of European countries, I know that in order to even work in the industry and show houses and properties and all that to people, you need to be licensed. You personally need to be licensed. That is not the case in Japan. As long as your company is licensed, then you don't have to have any license at all in order to do everything up until the actual contracting itself.
So is it a little bit like, for example, in the food and beverage industry, when you want to operate a restaurant in Japan, you need one person working at the restaurant to have the food and beverage license, but all the others don't need to have that license if that person has it?
That's correct. Yes.
Interesting.
Yes. And I mean, even with that, they don't need to have a license technically. They just need to be the one that signs the document saying that they have done the inspection to the restaurant. So Japan is weird in that most things, everything is very, very controlled, and you need to, be able to get the right licensing to do all these different things. But some things like real estate, like food and beverage, and even like if you wanted to, I mean, we can get into this later. If you wanted to renovate your house or apartment, as long as you're not going to be adding on things to it, you don't need to get any permits, period.
Yeah. I'm in that process right now, so we can get into this after.
Oh, great.
Renovation starting next week from the recording time.
Great.
I'm quite curious to go back at your beginnings in the real estate market. So you started in Nakameguro, which is a quite popular area in Tokyo, and prices vary greatly. So how was it for you to work with the first few foreigners looking for things? What are the typical requests you see from people moving to Japan or looking for a new place in Japan?
Yeah, so I mean, it kind of depends on if it's somebody that is already living here or is buying from abroad. Right. If you're already living here, people tend to be a bit more modest in what they're looking for, looking for maybe whatever the average Japanese home would be. So for Tokyo, at least, I'm not sure what it is in Osaka, but in Tokyo, the average home, this is between both apartments and houses, is only 65 square meters. That is the average size.
So 65 square meters, that will be 650 square feet.
Yeah, is most of your listenership American?
We have a lot in American, but I'd just like to convert it just in case.
Hello, Americans. Yeah, so in freedom units, that would be just under 700 square feet. So
that's the average size of a property in Tokyo, all things combined.
Exactly.
65 square meters.
Including houses, that's what I'm saying. So including, if there's houses that are like, 4,000 or 5,000 square feet in Tokyo. There's not many of them, but they do exist. So even if you add those in, it's only 65 square meters, about 700-ish square feet, so very small.
I can't tell where I saw these statistics a while back, but somewhat along the lines of 40% of Japanese properties are one-bedroom apartments.
Yeah, I don't know the exact number, but that does sound right.
And it is very you see all these tower mansions with like kind of these block. They talk about capsule hotels, but it's kind of like capsule homes, right? You just have one next to the other.
Yeah. I mean, because if you're looking for a one bedroom in Tokyo, it could be as small as about 300, 350 square feet, 35 square meters, let's call it, even smaller in most cases. And you can fit a lot of those into a building, So, I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about zoning later on, but Japan is interesting in that a couple of things. First off, there's no difference in single family versus multifamily zoning. So any residential plot, you can build either a house or an apartment on.
So what you're saying that is, if you compare the zoning system in Japan to, for example, the United States, in the United States, the government can decide this area will only be for housing, for families, and not for like high-rise buildings.
But not even high-rise. I'm talking even like low-rise. It doesn't matter. Like, at least in California, in the US, and I'm sure it is the same in most of Europe as well, there's single-family residence-only parts. And then there will be parts that are, you can put multifamily as well. You can put an apartment building, even if it's a low-rise, right? But in Japan, there is no difference whatsoever. So that's why you'll see house, apartments, house, apartment, house
or
right next to each other.
Sometimes just like a lot of tall buildings, and in the middle you'll have a tiny house that's still standing from decades ago.
Yeah, that's somebody who really didn't want to sell. You find that every once in a while, yeah.
With property prices kind of going all over the place, and in the last few years, I think Tokyo has been named regularly among the most expensive cities in the world. Is it really like that? Is Tokyo really that expensive when you talk about the property market?
That's the thing. It used to be. It really did used to be. There's a couple of factors that have made that change, though. So I've heard a couple of people say this, that Japan in the 1970s was in 2000. And it is still in 2000 these days. So the properties prices and all that have not really changed that much in most parts of Japan. In Tokyo, though, it has gone up, but it is not nearly as much as, say, if it was in Miami or Paris or London or New York City, LA, anything like that. I mean, there's parts of Tokyo, especially in the central parts and like the nicer buildings, where you can see prices double, quadruple, quintuple in very short spans of time. But at the same time, if you look at it on the grand scale of all the other major cities in the world, Tokyo is actually one of the cheapest places to live per square meter as of now. I mean, again, bringing up New York, for instance, New York is hideously expensive right now.
Yeah, I've heard stories of paying like thousands of dollars just to rent a small kind of cabinet in someone else's apartment.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, like let's see, like the average rent, I'm not sure about New York so much, but LA, for instance, you can't really get anything less for about you can't really get anything less than about $3,000 a month, right? So what is that right now? It's like almost 500,000 yen right now, right? Just under it. Yeah, like let's call it 450 to 5.
That's more than the average salary in Japan.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the average, that's not even the average rent. That's like the low end of the rent in at least I should say not central, but West LA, right? The West Side. And that's insane, right? If you're talking about Tokyo, you can easily get a 1-bedroom. It's not going to be big, but it'll be livable, right? For maybe $800 or less.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. And that's because Japan, unlike most countries, doesn't have a housing shortage. It actually has a housing surplus.
With about 8 million akiya, empty houses. We can talk about those later.
Yes, we can. Yes.
I'm curious. So when you got into the real estate market and you started working there, was there one thing that really surprised you in terms of how things work in Japan that you're like, oh?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So first off, I mean, luckily I do speak Japanese, so that wasn't an issue for me, but nobody speaks Japanese in this industry. I mean,
speaks English.
Yeah. That's what I mean. Sorry, there's nobody who speaks English in this industry. I mean, that's the same for most of Japan in general, but especially in this industry. This is an industry that is stereotypically old school. We use faxes on a daily basis. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I'll put it to you this way: if you go to my office, right? You're like, all right, I want to see this property. I'm like, okay. Call them up. They say, yeah, we can go see it today. All right, great. Can you send over a fax with your business card on it? Yeah, you have to do that in order to just, make a reservation to go see it later that day. There's stuff like that just makes it so old school. And and that was one of my, biggest surprises. The other one was just how closed off everything is, right? And it's not because I don't speak Japanese. It's not because I'm not Japanese, I should say. It's because that's just how the industry is. There's a ton of properties that I have like on my website or on I can't put on my website or on my YouTube channel or anything like that, right? Just because they don't want people to see it that are not in the know.
I see.
Right. And that's why it's very tough here. Yeah, if you don't have a good network of people to send you the right properties, there's a good chance you're never going to be able to find your clients anything.
That's difficult.
Yeah, which is the polar opposite of at least America. Yeah.
When I moved to Japan, I was kind of worried about finding a property because I had heard of needing a guarantor and famous or infamous key money. And so I did a Google search like apartment for foreigners in Osaka. And the company came up and they specialized in renting out to foreigners, like fully furnished apartments and such. Is this still a thing? Is this changing? Has COVID kind of changed this practice, or? I
don't think it's COVID really that's changing the practice. And to be honest, the practice is still very much there. Most properties are going to have the necessity for both a guarantor company and also you're going to have to pay key money on it, and they're going to be completely unfurnished. Like those are the three things that most places are going to be like. However, the good trend, at least in my opinion, is that there's more companies that are popping up that offer properties that don't have those things, right? Yeah, like the other ones are not changing. It's just there's more properties that don't have what we used to consider the norm.
We see a lot of questions online when we Google about key money, right? Like this kind of gift that we give the landlords as a thank you for letting us live there. Do you know where it comes from?
I do actually. Do you know where it comes from? I'm sure you've looked it up.
I looked it up and I was quite surprised. And it does make sense. What doesn't make sense is why this has kind of stayed for so long.
Right. Yeah.
So you can tell me if I'm wrong, but what I read is that basically after World War II,
That's right.
most cities were destroyed. For example, Tokyo,
Yep.
a lot of houses were gone. And the few that were still standing, basically people were asking the landlords if they could stay there as well to have a roof over their heads. And they would give money to that landlord to let them into the house, basically.
Thank you for the money, or thank you for the
Yes.
apartment, I guess. Exactly. Yeah.
And well, that has kind of stayed up until today.
Yes. So it's an unfortunate trend, and I don't think it's going to be going anywhere in the future. I mean, there are more and more properties that are offering no key money from the get-go, but I mean, the thing is, the Japanese market, it's just so developed around that people are willing to pay for it. You know, if you're talking about the non-Japanese people in Japan, of course, you're coming from another country. You're like, what is this key money? I don't want to be paying that. It's a non-refundable deposit. Are you kidding me? But you know, you have to realize though that like Japanese people make up almost 98% of the entire country. So the market is developed around people who are totally used to it, right? So I don't see it going away anytime soon. But you're exactly right about where it came from. Yeah.
But at the same time, we just mentioned earlier that there are so many empty properties, more and more so. And still, we are paying as a thank you. It should be the opposite nearly, right? Oh, thank you for renting my property. And I've seen cases of a friend moving into an apartment. There was no key money advertised, like no key money. And the moment the landlord, through the agent, heard that he was a foreigner renting it, he said 1 month's key money. So this kind of discrimination I've heard a few times. I don't know if it's going away or not. Maybe it's just kind of rare cases. Have you experienced this before when you kind of try to bring a property from an owner to someone who wanted to rent it and this kind of like, oh, it's a foreigner, I don't necessarily want to...
Oh, yeah. I mean, we could talk about the foreigner friendliness or lack thereof of properties in Japan. But can I ask, where was that person? Was that in Osaka or was that in Tokyo?
In Osaka.
In Osaka, okay. So Osaka tends to be a bit harsher towards foreigners, it seems, just in general, right? I work up in Tokyo. I will say that I have seen, not that many, but I have seen instances where they'll say, okay, it needs to be a bit more if it's a foreigner, or maybe a bit more security deposit needs to be paid or something like that. Key money, that's a new one, but I'm sure that it exists, you know. But yeah, just in general, if you are a non-Japanese national and you are trying to rent in anywhere in Japan, right, but especially not like the more expensive parts of either Tokyo or Osaka, you're going to have a hard time finding a place that is actually, you know, livable, or not livable, like they'll accept foreigners at all. It doesn't matter how good your Japanese is, doesn't matter what kind of company you work at, it doesn't matter how much money you make or how much money you have saved up. They're just going to be like, yeah, no, we're just going to wait it out, you know. And it is unfortunate, but that's also, unfortunately, a big part of my job is when I look up properties for clients. We're talking about rentals here, by the way, not so much for purchases. But if I'm looking for a rental for a client, a lot of my day is going to be calling them, right? Calling the property management companies and asking, is this property foreigner friendly? You know, and that will knock out. I mean, it doesn't happen so much in the higher end stuff, so I'm happy about that. But on the lower end stuff, and what I mean by lower end is not even that low. Anything below, let's say, I don't know, 150 to 180,000 yen ish. If it was if it's a 2-bedroom, maybe even below 200,000 yen, you're going to see a lot of properties that are a flat no. You get down to 80,000 yen or less, it's probably going to be about 70% of properties are non-foreigner friendly.
That's quite a lot.
Yeah.
But you said not so much on the high-end market. So I want to talk now about Tokyo portfolio.
Yeah, sure.
That's kind of how you've become known on YouTube, but it's actually your agency that is kind of operated by Black Ship Realty. Is that correct?
So it's a little confusing. So Black Ship Realty is my company. I started it with my business partner just about 2 years ago now, as of this recording, guys. And I started Tokyo Portfolio about 3-ish years ago as a YouTube channel and also as a website. So my agency is also Black Ship Realty, but my personal channel and the website and everything is branded as Tokyo Portfolio. So it's a little confusing. But we do focus on high-end residential and commercial real estate, both for purchase and for rent. But these days it's more for purchase than rent, sure.
What made you decide to get started into having your own agency?
You know, I have always been the kind of person that doesn't like to work for other people. I had 3 different jobs before starting my own thing, and yeah, I just even before that in college and all that, I was always doing things, you know, trying to make money on my own. And I'd never had like a part-time job, and you know, during high school or college or anything. I was always just doing other things to make ends meet, and I needed that freedom. I needed that kind of the way to, you know, do what I want and
the way you want.
Exactly, the way I want. Thank you.
And you did mention before that, so when you want to work in real estate in Japan, just the agency needs the license. And you were working for other agencies, but now you have your own. Was it something that you had to get, or did you business partner? Was it easy to acquire?
So we have an agent for that, so that's not an issue.
So it's just basically an administrative procedure. If anyone wants to get into real estate, there are like lawyers that can help to kind of get through
basically, that. Yeah. They're not lawyers, they're registered agents, but yeah, same deal.
What was the reason for kind of focusing on a very high-end market? And so I went to your website, you have properties that range from 200, 400,000 yen a month, but also up to 2.5 million yen a month for rent, right? So this is kind of very high-end already.
Yeah. So the question was, what's the point of going to higher
why did
end?
you decide to go for this market away from the kind of, I want to help foreigners to Nakameguro?
Yeah, well, so even still in Nakameguro, I was not focusing on everybody. I was, you know, because we were always a small team. Even now, we're not that big of a company in terms of headcount. So if you're talking about limited resources, then definitely going for the more expensive per transaction route versus, you know, more cheaper transactions is the way to go, right? Just more bang for your buck.
Before we started rolling the cameras, I was a bit surprised because the rents that are advertised for these properties are very, very high and way above what most average salaries, or maybe even slightly above average salaries, could afford. What kind of clientele are you dealing with on a regular basis? Sure.
So it depends on, again, if we're talking about people in Japan versus outside Japan, and even if we're talking about people who are looking to rent or buy, right? If you're looking for people in Japan that are looking to rent, generally speaking, they're going to be working at, you know, big companies, big corporations, either like foreign-owned corporations in Japan or just big Japanese corporations, right? It's a lot of IT people and finance as well. What else do we have? Not really food and beverage too much, but every once in a while you'll get your crypto bro, you know. But that's for rents. Oh, and also diplomats. Yes, we do focus a lot on diplomats. Yes. So our office is in Hiro, if you know where that is.
No.
So you know Roppongi.
Yes.
Right. So right next to Roppongi, which is the crazy expat neighborhood of Tokyo, is Hiro, which is the family expat neighborhood. It's literally one station next to it. And that's exactly where our office is. So, and that's where basically every embassy is as well. You know, you have the German embassies right up there. You have the French embassy right down the street from that too. You know, the American embassy is not too far from there too. And that's why we decided to go right there, is because that's where most of our clientele is. And also I've always had a good network with the embassies in Japan. So it kind of worked its way into my job.
Natural kind of.
And a natural progression, you know. So, I mean, we assist them with both their housing, and then every once in a while they're going to have an embassy that's like, oh, well, we need to buy a place. You know, we need to move embassies. So we've assisted with those as well.
Cool. Do you notice any specific type of requests that come regularly in this kind of higher-end clientele with apartments, things that they are looking for that are maybe rare in Japan?
Yeah, that's okay. I was wondering where you're going with that. Yes, there's a lot. So let's just talk about what Japanese places don't generally have that everybody outside of Japan would want. One, multiple bathrooms.
True.
Yep. In Japan, if you don't live in Japan or have never lived in Japan, you'll love to hear this. You will almost never find more than one bath even in a house. Yeah.
Even
in a house. Even if it's a 4 or 5 bedroom, the max you would have in terms of bathrooms would probably be a 1.5 bath. So just one full bath and then an extra toilet, right? and which is incredible, right? In my opinion. I don't know. In France, I'm assuming you get
usually 2 in a house, and apartments depends on the size.
right. If it's a 3-bedroom apartment, you would generally have 2 baths, so right. So over here, 3-bedroom, 1 bath, 4-bedroom, 1 bath, 5-bedroom, 1 bath, 6-bedroom, 1.5 bath.
So if you actually fill up the 6 bedrooms, and in the morning you have to queue.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Take your ticket, but that's quite typical in Japan. Right?
Yeah,
To take
people
your
love
ticket, you
lining
stay
up,
on.
so it works out in that regard. So yeah, 1 would be bathrooms or lack thereof. 2 would be just the overall quality in general of the builds for kitchen and or bathrooms, right? Anything that has to do with water, not too good. Right. And what I mean by the build quality, I'm sorry, I should say the build quality is very good. The craftsmanship is phenomenal. It is probably the best in the world. I will go on record saying this, that Japanese build quality is better than anywhere else I've ever seen. You want a straight wall, they'll build you a straight wall. However, it's going to be made out of garbage. The doors are going to be made out of basically laminated cardboard. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but have you ever knocked on a Japanese door?
So on a typical apartment, the doors are thin, the walls usually are thinner, and you see on online forums a lot of complaints on foreign online forums. Of complaints, you can hear the neighbor go to the toilet at all times of day and night, and it's just kind of frustrating after.
Especially when your neighbor apparently has IBS or something, so that's very unfortunate for them. But what I will say is that the wall situation, that's a little bit overboard. Okay, I will say this. That is definitely the case in the cheaper apartments, but once you get to anything that's above maybe, I don't know, 150, 200,000 a month or something like that. Generally speaking, they're going to, especially if it's like a concrete building, you're not really going to hear your neighbors too much.
So older buildings usually have a tendency, when they built out of concrete, to be more solid and more quiet and kind of...
Exactly. And then also the older buildings especially tend to be made out of wood. So if you ever heard the terms in Japan, apato and mansion, do you know what the difference between the two is?
No, actually.
So apato is made of wood.
That's it?
That's it. Wow. Or it could be a light steel frame as well. But generally speaking, it's made of wood. It's apato. Not generally speaking. That is it. And if it's made out of reinforced concrete, it is mansion. Doesn't matter how big or small it is. It could be a tower mansion, as they call it, the big skyscrapers. It could be 3 stories or less. Doesn't matter.
I didn't know that. I thought it was based on the size.
Nothing to do with that, no. So if it's made out of concrete, it is mansion. And those are the higher end ones. Those you're not really going to hear your neighbors as much. Generally speaking, but yeah.
So the common problem in those apartments is that the build quality is great, but the materials used are usually cheaper.
Yes. So that is basically a function of Japanese people not wanting to spend a lot of money because they didn't have to before, right? And like if you were to live in a place from the bubble era, right? I mean, late 1980s, early 1990s, let's call it. The materials that they used back then were very good, actually. You can go into, there's a series of buildings in Tokyo. It's called domus, D-O-M-U-S. And those are like solid wood doors, like oak doors, you know. And really, I mean, they're all carpeted, unfortunately, and you can't change that out, but plush carpet, amazing carpet.
Nice.
Yeah. But if you're talking about, anything after that, people are very, very against spending more money than they need to. If you remember back when they changed the price, there's an ice cream bar. It's called, what was it? Gari Gari Kun?
Yes.
You know that one? Like the blue
I
one?
do.
Yeah, so they raised the price by 10 yen, 8 cents, let's call it, right? And they actually had a press conference where, like, the CEO and
Nationwide
everybody,
apology.
they did a bit. Yep, you remember about that, probably,
do.
right? So that's the kind of country that we're in right here. So they expect to be able to get a large place, a livable space in a good area, for not that much money. They're gonna have to cheap out in a lot of things, and that's just the unfortunate reality about it.
What's the story with windows? It's always
Single
a single
pane.
pane window.
Yeah.
Although it's a country that's very mountainous, that gets relatively cold in winter, very cold in some areas.
Yep.
That gets very hot in summer, very humid in most of the country. And so you have the air cons running all year long, either to cool or to heat. But the moment you turn them off, everything goes away because it's poorly insulated.
Oh, yeah. And let's talk about how cold the bathrooms and the hallways are while we're at it, because Japanese places don't have central heat or AC. Yeah, that would be, again, just an unfortunate part of Japanese cheapness in general when you're talking about, wanting to save on, like, cost cutting. That's not cheapness. It's just because dual pane glass is so much more expensive than single pane glass. Although I will say, for anything built past maybe 2012 or something like that, even some stuff from like the late 2000s, you'll be seeing dual pane glass more and more.
So it's changing a little
It
bit.
is changing. I mean, even your office might have dual pane. I could take a look, but triple pane, no. The only time I've ever seen triple pane was in Hokkaido. Right? They build differently up there because it is just so cold.
Yeah, that goes to minus 30, 40 Celsius.
Yeah, it's Siberian weather basically at that point. And so you'll see, it's rare, but you'll see triple pane glass up there sometimes.
So if you're not getting double pane windows and you have relatively cheaper built material and you don't have more than one washroom, what exactly are you paying for these very expensive properties? What is is it just the land, the size that you're paying for?
It's the location, it's the size of the place. Look, I will say, every once in a while you will fall into you'll walk into a place that is actually well built, let's call it, right, with good materials. But even still, it's not going to be amazing, right? So like a good example would be there's the developer called Mori. They have, like if you know Roppongi Hills, that's them. Omotesando Hills, anything that has hills in their name generally is Mori. And Azabudai Hills, that's their newest one. Yeah, so Toranomon Hills is the one that was built right before Azabudai Hills, just down the street from it. And they have what's called the residential tower, right? And their penthouse suites are very nice, right? As you would expect. But compared to, say, New York or, London or probably Paris or Berlin even, the materials that they're using, maybe not Berlin. Berlin's its own thing. But, compared to the other cosmopolitan cities, it's just like, it's okay. It's not, wow, it's not jaw-dropping, And even when you have some of the best architects in Japan designing a place, like Kengo Kuma, for instance. He did the Park Court Hinokicho, the tower building, it's called. It's over like right near Roppongi Midtown. The exterior is amazing. The lobby is phenomenal, but the rooms are absolutely boring, and that's just because they don't care so much. People want to be in that building. They don't really care about the inside. I mean, this is probably the biggest reason, is because, again, at the end of the day, they're building for Japanese audiences, and Japanese people just they tend to not invite people over.
That's true.
I don't know how many people, like, you have to be on a very, very good relationship with somebody for them to even think of having you over. And even still, a lot of the times they're going to be just like saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry. It is filthy. It is,
but it's
a
spotless
mess."
clean.
But it's perfectly clean. Yeah, but it's just not part of Japanese culture to have people over like it is in the West. So that's why, people just don't really. That's probably another reason that they don't care so much about the interiors.
So when you deal with a foreign clientele, diplomats or people that are being kind of expatriated from large corporations to Japan, how do you work around those things? Because I can imagine when someone is paying that kind of rent and they have their own maybe experience from New York, from LA, they want to have their level of comfort there, but they can't get this.
Yep, it's a problem, especially since a lot of embassies will have their own rules that say, "Oh, well, we have to give our diplomats a similar kind of living situation than they would have back home," right? So if you're talking about, I don't know, like a European country, it's going to be, for a one bedroom, that's going to be at least 75, 80 square meters, like 800 square feet, let's call it. That's big for a one bedroom in Tokyo. Yeah. Like a nice one bedroom would be 55 to 60, generally speaking. I mean, that's getting into two bedroom territory. Even three bedrooms I've seen at 80 square meters. So that's definitely a big problem, is just lack of there's just nothing that we can show them. There's just no properties out there. They do exist. They do, but they are generally occupied by other, diplomats
that don't want to move out,
that are not moving out. Yeah, exactly. So it really, really depends. I mean, this is the problem is I get a lot of people who, they'll work at some embassy or they work at a big company and all that. And they recommend us because we have gotten them this amazing property and it was all just based on timing, right? Like there was this property that we got a guy that works at an IT company in Utenji, Utenji, like right next to Nakameguro, right? Beautiful area. It's on top of the hill. And it was this beautiful one bedroom, about 70 square meters, 750, let's call it.
That's
square
big
feet,
for a one bedroom.
which is beautiful. Yeah, it's a huge one bedroom. And it had a rooftop balcony of the same size.
Cool.
Barbecue friendly. Yeah. Okay. And and you see Tokyo Tower from the rooftop, like
everyone's dream.
Exactly. And it wasn't even like expensive or anything. It's so good that the guy's trying to buy it off of the owner, but it's not happening. But when he says, "Oh yeah, Black Ship, yeah, they helped us out," and then they come over to us and they're like, "Oh yeah, hey, can you get something like that guy?" I'm like, "Nah, man, sorry.
It doesn't exist. That was the one and only."
He just happened to be here at the right time. He just good timing.
You mentioned architect like Kengo Kuma earlier.
Yes.
And one thing that I notice in Japan is you sometimes walk around into a random neighborhood and you have these similar looking tower mansions and you have some ikenya, these kind of homes in a row, and suddenly you have a super random, super crazy designed house. Mm-hmm. How does this come to be so frequently in Japan? Because I have not seen this in any other country where you suddenly have this very unique, very creative, very modernist architecture as a single family home and someone is actually living there. It's not a museum, it's not an art space, it's a home.
Right. So let's just talk about why everything else seems boring and then you have the one crazy one, right? The reason that everything else is boring is because Japanese people have this in their minds, and it is true in some aspects, that if you have a building, right, a house, and it's 10 years old, it's just going to be going down in value over time. So it's really only going to be worth the value of the land at some point, right? Because it's just, Japanese people don't move a lot. They usually will just tear down and rebuild, right? So if you're going to be selling off your land to somebody else, there's a very good chance, or I should say, if you're going to be selling your house to somebody else, there's a good chance that they're just going to tear it down and rebuild whatever they want on top of it, right? So at the end of the day, Japanese people don't really want to put money into their own household, right? Which is the exact opposite of, in most places where a house is your biggest investment and asset, right? Over here, it's the land.
It's the land.
Right? So you will, every once in a while, get somebody crazy that actually is like, oh, well, you know what? I'm going to make a nice house and I'm going to get some famous architect to do it, right? They also have to have a lot of money to do that because that is quite expensive to do, of course. But so the cost is one reason that you find those places that you only find those places every once in a while. The second reason, though, is because unlike a lot of countries, there are no rules in most parts of Japan. There are exceptions, but in most parts of Japan, there are almost no rules for, there are no HOAs, let's start with that. So there's no homeowners associations that say, oh, you can't make the exterior pink. You can't, it can't be modernist, it can't be whatever. There's no rules for that.
So you can build whatever you want.
You have this huge freedom to build whatever you want. And this is what I'm saying, the dichotomy of Japanese society where so many things, they say the nail, what is it called? Like the nail that's sticking out gets hammered down, So that's the kind of society that people think, rightly so, that Japan is, except when it comes to housing, right? But most people will still kind of abide to that, even though there are no rules to it. But then every once in a while you get the eccentric guy, the doctor or whatever, that decides, hey, I'm going to build something crazy.
And I read online, I don't know if this is true, maybe you know more, that in Japan, actually, there are a lot of very young architects that come out of school and that are interested in, to build their portfolio, kind of create very original standout properties, and that you can get a unique house designed by one of those young architects for much less than you would have a custom house in Europe or in the US.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the building, the cost of building over here is so much cheaper than most major cities, right? I mean, per square foot, right? I'm guessing that's what people would think mostly. And if you want to get the highest end it would be probably about $600 to $650 per square foot, right?
Okay.
So that is considered, in LA at least, that would be considered low high end. But over here, that is the highest high end that you can go, basically. If you go anything above that, then you're just importing some crazy marble from Italy or something like that. So it's not a matter of what the build quality will be like. It will just be, okay, do you want gold-plated toilets or do you want platinum-plated toilets? At that point. But I mean, you can build something so cool over here for peanuts. Like just talking about doctors before, my dentist. Right, I've been to his house a couple of times. He's Japanese, but he he has this crazy house. It's all concrete, looks like an Ando property kind of, and in the living room, he has this huge glass wall, like a corner glass like this, and inside it is his car. Right, and it's on the second floor, so he has a car elevator in his house. So he has
a car elevator that brings the car into the living room with a glass wall, so he can sit, watch TV, and look at his car.
Exactly.
I assume he has a nice car too.
Yeah, he has two very nice cars. He has what was that thing? It's a vintage Aston Martin from the 1960s or something. Yeah,
collector.
A huge collector of cars and watches and all that kind of stuff. Great guy. Shout out to Alex, by the way. He goes by Alex. But so that's what I'm saying. You can do these kind of crazy things in Japan for not that much money. It's just that Japanese people don't want to spend the money.
What about renovating? It's a topic we haven't really gotten into. And so I just bought a property here in the northern part of Osaka.
Congratulations.
And renovations are starting next week as we record this. And yeah, the property is solid. Like you said, it's built in the 80s. So concrete.
Oh, wow.
And kind of very nice structure.
Is that a house or
apartment?
Oh, okay, cool.
And it just made sense to renovate that. But in Japan, not so many are doing it. And yet it's starting to become a trend too. We see a lot of cool renovation companies. But maybe a lot of foreigners dream about the akiya renovation as well, the kind of countryside, kominka. Is this something that's coming, or what is standing in the way for more renovation and preservation of materials?
Sure. So I like what you're saying about preservation of materials. Let's just start with the fact that Japan is very bad at SDGs, even though they're trying to be
promote them, sustainable development
so much.
goals.
Yeah. So they use that term so much, and I completely forgot that people speaking English do not know what SDGs are, because no, it's just sustainability, right? Japan is so bad at it. You go to a grocery store, they have the bananas wrapped in plastic. I mean,
one by one.
One by one, exactly. So in this country, do you think that people are willing to buy something older and then renovate it into something new? That was definitely not the case before. That's why you've lost a ton of cool old buildings, and there's still a lot being lost every year because of this. But there is a growing love of older places that is happening, and especially when you're talking about how the price of new buildings in Tokyo and Osaka probably as well has just been going up and up and up every year. More and more people are thinking, oh, well, you know what? We can do this thing where we buy an older place and change up the inside, maybe even the outside. And that could be nice to live in, And it could actually be worth more than it was originally, worth before. So this is slowly getting into the Japanese psyche, and it is getting into the society over here, definitely. But it's a problem when you talk about depreciation, right? Because in Japan, basically anything that is too old will not be lent towards by a bank. Right. So if you're talking about buying, you were talking about akiya, right? The whole abandoned house situation that they have in Japan. If you're trying to buy anything that is older than 1980, from before 1984, which is when all properties had to start abiding by the earthquake standards, the new earthquake standards, there's a good chance you're not going to be able to get financing on it.
So you just need to pay it out cash, or you can't buy it.
That is correct. There are banks, not too many, but there are banks that will lend to those, but you're not going to get a good rate. You're not going to get that much loan to value. You're going to get probably half or less loan to value. So, to most people, that just disincentivizes the entire idea of, buying an older place, renovating it, living in it, flipping it, doesn't matter. But you are more and more getting companies that are doing this. You're getting people, both Japanese and non-Japanese, that are doing this. And I mean, I am a huge proponent of that. I love older places that are, well renovated. I did a video on one in Nara. Did you see that video? I'm not sure.
I saw that you did a nice video on your channel recently where you went to this kominka in
in Kyoto.
In Kyoto.
Yes.
Nantan? No.
Yes, I think it was Nantanshi, yeah.
And basically most of the structure is gone, but the roofs and the central pillars are remaining. And but the way it's been redesigned is to kind of keep the thatched roof and preserve this historical feel for the place, right?
Absolutely, yeah. That is a rarity, by the way. So in Japan, the rules kind of state that if you keep the original posts in there, then it's considered a renovation instead of a new build. So you could change everything out in there, which
Except
is exactly what they did.
Pole.
Yeah, exactly. So they kept the poles in there, and you can see they actually exposed them, so that's nice. I did another video about a similar thing. I have a friend who has a furniture place over in Nakameguro, and he just loves everything, mid-century American,
Okay.
right? Like, that's his shtick, right?
I like
He's
it
just,
too. So I get it.
You get it, right? And he lives by it. He has a 1969 Impala, he loves everything from between the 40s and the 60s, basically. And he bought this house, which it might have been considered an akiya. So, I mean, by the way, akiya just means that it's uninhabited, right, guys? But with this one, a lot of the reasons why you find these places is because, especially in Tokyo, in the older parts of the city, you'll find places that have too narrow of an entrance, right? They have a law that says that the width of the entrance, like the pathway from the street, has to be 2 meters or more, so about 6.5 feet or more, or else you can't rebuild on it, right?
Oh.
So this is the problem, is that when you're talking about selling this off in the future, as I was saying before, if the structure is too old, banks are not going to lend to it. And, especially if the land can't be rebuilt on, it's worthless, So he bought a worthless house for probably 30% of what the market value would be if it was not the kind of property it was in that area. And he spent a lot of time and money and turned it into a place that it looks like something in Palm Springs. It's just like as mid-century American
as it could get,
as you can get. Exactly. And that, even though he basically didn't leave anything original except for 2 posts, that is a renovation. That is not a new build, so he was able to get away with it.
Cool.
Yeah.
But then the idea for people to always, I'm going to get one of those free houses in Japan and renovate it, is not always a good idea, right? Because it's usually a lot more work than people think, a lot more money and time to get it to a livable standard. Because if it's usually worth 0, then it's also probably because you can't live there.
There's usually a good reason that they are so cheap, I will say that. I mean, look, there's always the exceptions. You just have to be very careful when you're buying the place. And especially if you're not here and, you're trying to buy a really decrepit place, not decrepit, but you don't know if it's decrepit unless you see it in person.
Yeah, you can't inspect it, right? You might not see some water damage below. You might not see some cracks somewhere in the wall.
Exactly. So if you have somebody that you trust on the ground over here that can look at it for you and say, oh, well, you got this leakage from the roof, or, the floors are crooked or whatever, because that's a pretty common thing with the older places. And say, okay, well, in order to fix this up, you need to do this, this, and this, and it'll probably cost it. If you have somebody like that, that's fine. But if you're talking about, just jumping in head first and saying, oh, well, there was a $500 house over in Okayama. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. Except, okay, how are you going to get to Okayama every time you come to Japan? It's also going to be an 1.5-hour drive from the airport. And the house is, on a slope of a mountain that has been known to have landslides. So there's all these different things. There's always a reason. You do get what you pay for.
So let's talk about acquiring a property.
Sure.
Because you gave an interesting example now of someone buying the property from being overseas. And now maybe some people have a question about, can you buy a property while not even living in Japan?
Oh, yeah. No, so Japan is one of the few places in Asia that you do not need to have a local partner when you're buying it. Like a lot of Southeast Asian countries, you need to be like you can only come in at 49%.
Like Thailand.
Like Thailand, I think the Philippines might be like that too. Don't take my word on that though. And also, it's also unlike Hong Kong and Singapore, where I mean Singapore not so much, but especially Hong Kong, where everything is leasehold. Right, so leasehold meaning you don't own the lands, you just lease it from either the government or from another person, right? And you have to pay them month by month.
Because the land is so limited.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest reason. I mean, it's also, I think, like British mandate rules from way back when as well kind of helped with that. And there's also a lot of complex political stuff that I'm not going to get into, but well, I'll let you talk to whatever geopolitical expert you get to talk about that kind of stuff. But Tokyo, Japan in general, I would say most properties, over 90% of them are going to be freehold, which means you do actually own the lands. There are no restrictions for anybody to buy land over here. Doesn't matter where you are. Doesn't matter if you have a visa. Doesn't matter if you're from a country that you can't really get a visa easily to come to Japan. As long as you got the cash and you got an address in whatever country you're from and you can prove that, you can buy a property.
What if you're in Japan and you want to go through the process? So I just went through, I know what it is, like a little bit, but before getting into that, I've heard so many stories of especially foreigners really struggling to get a loan from a bank to buy a property, and this form is not right and that form is not right, and suddenly you need to go to the Shiyakusho, City Hall again, and suddenly your hanko, the stamp that you need to sign with, because you can't sign just with your signature, is not in the right format, and then you need to get a new one and you need to have it registered properly. And it's very scary for many people. If we put it simply, what's the process like if you live in Japan and you want to buy a property?
Sure. Okay. So first off is find the property that you want to buy. All right. And if you do find a property that you want to buy, it's right in the budget that you want, or you can talk them down to whatever you want to pay for it. It's pretty simple from there on, as long as you do it right. Right. So I make sure to tell my clients exactly how to do this. You know, I sit down with them and say, this is what you got to do. This is exactly how you do it. So first off, you put in the offer, say they accept the offer. It's, maybe like a week or two later, you're going to be signing that contract. Right. And are we talking about with or without a mortgage?
Let's talk first without.
Without a mortgage. Oh, that's easy then. That's like buying a car. Okay. Honestly, yeah. I mean, you sign the contract. If you have the funds ready to go on that day, you can sign the contract, pay the entire price of the house, and then get the keys on the same day. I don't know if any other country, I mean, there's probably other Asian countries that are like that, but where I'm from, you have to do escrow, you have to, do all these kind of things, and that'll take you minimum 2-3 months usually. Okay. Right? But over here, you can get everything done on the same day. Right? If you waive your rights to, do any inspections or anything like that. Yeah. And that's how you're probably going to be buying an akiya, like an abandoned house, just FYI. But if you want to talk about loans.
Well, let's assume most people need a loan to buy a property.
Yes.
How do they get a loan in Japan?
Sure. So 2 different branches. With permanent residency, without permanent residency. That's the 2 big things right here. Without permanent residency, your banks are going to be severely limited. There's probably only 3-ish banks that will even consider your application, and they don't offer the best rates for interest or the best loan to value most of the time. But you beggars can't be choosers, unfortunately. So like if we're talking about buying a house, let's say. If it's normal, if you did have PR, it would be a lot easier. You would try to get a bank to give you what's called a pre-approved loan. They'll just do a light screening on you. They'll look at the property. They'll say, okay, well, we'll give you 80% at 0.95% interest, right? Or whatever. And then you can bring that piece of paper over to the seller's. Well, we'll bring it up to the seller's agency. Say, hey, look, he's got the paper that says he'll get 80%, so we're good, right? And by the way, this is how much he wants to pay. And then you'll do all the contract paperwork. That's if you have permanent residency. If you don't have permanent residency, I don't know of any bank that will do a pre-screening on you. So you just have to sign the contract first, pay your 5 or 10% down payment on that, in cash, by the way, and just start the whole process with the bank of, doing loads of paperwork, including they even have mortgage payments insurance. So like if did you get a mortgage on your property?
I did. I basically went the exact route you're just describing. Right
Okay,
now,
so you don't have permanent residency.
I don't have permanent
that's
residency.
unfortunate. Okay. But so I don't know if they do this in a lot of countries, but they have basically a mortgage payment insurance. So if you die or become sickly or something like that and you're unable to pay, then the insurance will kick into that. So
Yes.
you probably had to do a health checkup.
I did not.
Oh, that's
but
nice.
I do have this kind of insurance. On top of it.
Okay.
So the process was pretty much as you described. But what was interesting for me is what I heard before is if you don't have permanent residency, you need to be spouse of a Japanese national.
No, that is not true.
Not officially, but most banks will not want you to not be.
Oh yeah, don't get me wrong. Absolutely, that is
So
the
it's
case.
not legally required for you, but most banks in their own regulation system will not agree to that. But in my case, my wife and I are now married, but they did not require it at the beginning.
Okay.
They're like, oh yeah, you can apply and we'll do the pre-screening and everything. And we went through the process, like a lot of paperwork, and we did sign this contract and we did pay in cash, and I did walk out of the bank with like 1 million yen in my pocket, and I was like,
Oh wait, you brought? Oh, you mean to pay the down payment?
to pay the down
I see,
payment?
I see.
Yeah. And that was kind of like, is this okay to walk around with this much cash? But
It's
like you
Japan.
said in the beginning, it's
Yeah,
Japan, right?
yeah.
That was
Even though it's Osaka. I mean, Japanese people freak out. Oh, Osaka is so dangerous. Yeah, no, it's not.
it's
I mean,
not.
my God, it is not. There's like one sketchy part of Osaka, but it's not even that sketchy. You know, it's just like a normal street in New York.
But the scary part was just this. Do we really need to bring the cash? Like, can't we just do like a bank transfer? Like
Usually,
you do?
yes. Yeah, no,
But
usually-
no, they did ask for the cash for the
Did they?
deposit.
That's
and
crazy. Wait, did you buy it directly from the developer? No, you didn't buy it from the developer. You bought an
No.
older place.
Yes,
They
correct.
asked for it in cash. I mean, I've had people say, hey, is it okay if I bring cash? I've never had it where the seller mandates cash.
Yeah, for the deposit.
That's what I mean. Yeah, that's crazy. I mean,
And so that was quite an interesting process. And then we signed this pre-contract and then the loan contract. And then we went back to sign the final contract and we got the papers.
that's exactly how it is. It's
But
just a very long and arduous process.
It's a long
but
and
yes.
arduous process. But as you said, if everything is in order, everything went very smoothly.
Yeah.
I've had friends where they had to go back and forth because every time something was not correct, whether the hanko was not in the right format or this was not registered or
Right.
this form had this check mark missing from your tax returns or whatever. And then it just is a big headache.
Yep.
But if everything is in order, it's quite smooth.
So that's the German part in you coming out, I'm guessing. Did you have a folder with all of your paperwork in it and like a
yeah,
binder? Yeah,
yeah.
I know how you guys work. It's great. If you have your stuff together, if you have it all together and everything is perfectly fine, it's just going to take time. I mean, they're not going to make you like run back and forth to do stuff that they'll tell you straight from the beginning, you have to get this, and this, and it has to be done this way. If you don't do it that way, they're going to be like, oh, no, this has to be done this way. Or they're going to have an excuse. But if you have everything set up from day one perfectly, then no issues.
So when you occasionally assist a foreign client to buy a property here that needs a loan, do you sometimes see their perplexity at some of the systems here where they're like, no, but I don't want to do it this way. I want to do it like in my country. And like, do you notice any kind of issue points, concerns that people have with?
Yeah, let's talk about negotiations because that's where this is the biggest problem, I would say. Japan, they don't negotiate in Japan.
So that's what I experienced.
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
It was like, can we like reduce like a little bit? You know, it was the person wanted to sell, like it's an old property, it needs renovation. Maybe we can get the price down. No.
Okay. I will say there are exceptions, right? First off is if you're in Osaka, but you just got unlucky with your property, I will say. In Tokyo, if you're going to negotiate, it's probably going to be maximum 5% off of asking, right? So Japanese sellers, generally speaking, there are exceptions to this, of course, will usually put their property up at more or less market value, like fair market value, right? And that's why they don't like going down that much. And then also when you're talking about like lowballing, for instance, which is a very common thing where I'm from. I don't know how it is in your neck of the woods.
Not sure.
No,
but
because you never bought a house over
yeah.
there. But yeah, it's a very common thing where I'm from. You go 20% lower or something like that. They're just gonna throw out your offer, period, and a lot of the times not talk to you again over here if you try to
because
do this.
deem it as you're not taking this seriously.
Yeah, I mean, they deem it almost as an insult a lot of the times, you know. And like I've had people that refuse to take my advice and go way lower than I said they should, and then literally this is exactly what happened. Like the seller just threw it out and didn't want to deal with the guy, right? Even though it was a cash buyer, by the way.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's one thing. So when you are negotiating for price in Japan, if you're going to do it, just make sure that you give them the maximum that you're willing to spend on the first ask, right? Because it's not negotiation, it's an offer of I will pay this much, right? It's not, hey, let's meet in the middle. It's I want to pay this much, or I can pay this much, right? So yeah, that's how it works over here.
Do you notice a lot of differences? So you work mostly in Tokyo, but for your Tokyo portfolio YouTube channel, you occasionally visit properties in Kyoto and Nara, maybe soon other places in Japan. Does it work differently if you are in Okayama, Hiroshima, and Sapporo, or is everything more or less the same across Japan?
It is pretty different because Tokyo just has a lot of demand, right? There is a lot of supply, don't get me wrong, but if you're in the parts of Tokyo that my clientele tends to want to buy in, so in Minato, Shibuya, you know, those boards of Tokyo, sometimes Setagaya, Meguro, those kind of areas too. Unless you're kind of on the outskirts of those areas, there's going to be other people that are probably interested in the same property. So it's going to be a little hard to negotiate. Versus in Osaka, for instance, where you already have a kind of bargaining culture to begin with.
Yeah, Osaka is more like a merchant.
It's a merchant
city.
Exactly. A very mercantile city. I don't know if that's the right word. But anything... Yeah, so Osaka just has that vibe to it in general. But if you go outside of the major cities, if you go even outside of Hiroshima, you go to Okayama, you go to, I don't know, Tottori or something like that. At that point, people are listing their places and not always expecting to be selling it within the first or second year sometimes. So if they get an offer, there's a good chance that they'd be like, okay, you know, as long as it's not like way, way below, you know, in which case it would be insulting again, right? A lot of the times they'll be like, okay, you know what, this is fair. Yeah, you know. Because you've probably seen the news reports on major outlets, and even like sometimes you'll see real estate brokerage firms put out these kind of releases that say that Japanese property values have been going down over time. That is true, right? But not so much in the cities, and especially not in Tokyo and even Osaka, to be honest. So people outside of these cities are pretty, yeah, they're usually a bit more okay,
willing
to let go with
like
a
person-to-person negotiation. I want to buy your property. Okay, let's talk about it, as opposed to the very maybe structured way of dealing.
Oh no, it's usually structured too. It is definitely.
I'm not saying it's not structured, but it's more a willingness to engage in a discussion. Whereas, for example, in my case, I never met the owner.
Oh, that's the norm. That is still the norm, even outside. You know, because in Japan, it is not just real estate, but in most business over here, there's a term called madoguchi, right? So it means like the window, right?
Yeah.
So like you have like the teller at a bank, for instance, that's a madoguchi, right? You're dealing with that one person. And that is not just real estate, that's for anything, any kind of customer service related thing or sales related thing. You're gonna have your person in charge and you're only gonna be dealing with that person. And if you were to like go around that person, that is a huge faux pas, right? To the point that the whole deal could like be shot up in the air because of that, right? And especially when it comes to real estate transactions, there's almost always going to be 2 agents or more per transaction. You're going to have the seller's agent and the buyer's agent. And they will talk to each other. The seller will never talk to the buyer's agent. The buyer will never talk to the seller's agent in most cases. And yeah, that's just how it works. And that's not just Tokyo, that's pretty much anywhere. Unless it's like, oh yeah, he's my neighbor, I know the guy, you know, he came over for drinks one time and we discussed the price and yeah, we'll do it for 30% off. You know, like that does happen, but that's very uncommon.
You've been doing this for quite a few years. You started Black Sheep Realty 2 years ago. Have a YouTube channel where you showcase super interesting properties in Tokyo, in other prefectures, hopefully more soon.
Thank you. Yeah.
What do you want to do next? what are the plans for you in real estate? Are there specific properties you'd like to visit, like a famous architect's home or something like that on a personal level?
Oh my God, I would love to be able to do that kind of stuff. But as I was saying, Japanese people are very, very reluctant to have people over, and especially to have their places filmed. My God, I've tried to get permission to do stuff like that in the past. That is one goal, definitely, though, for the channel at least. Yeah, I mean, just in terms of what we're doing right now, we're in the process of opening up a new location, also in Hiro, just really, really close to the station. And yeah, that's going to be a huge milestone for us. And also, I mean, in the future, we do want to focus more on developing stuff, you know, in terms of, developing properties, because there is definitely an unexploited niche in Japan for, you know, international buyers. Because as I was saying before, Japan, or Tokyo, I should say, is one of the cheapest cosmopolitan cities in the world in terms of properties. And there's a lot more interest in Japan these days, you know, for both investing in and also just wanting to have a second place to live in or vacation home or something. So the only problem, though, is that there's nothing for those people. Right, so that is one thing that we're working on, is making more properties for people who.
So we might see flagship realty mansions soon, because you know all these developers usually have the Presence or Leon Comfort or whatever they all have all their.
We'll think of a name that's not too cheesy, but yeah.
For someone who's listened to this and is maybe interested in trying career in real estate in Japan, what kind of advice would you like to give them?
Learn Japanese. Learn Japanese. Definitely. You need to have a very good grasp in Japanese if you're going to succeed in this business.
Spoken and written, I assume?
Both. Exactly. You need to be, I mean, if you know JLPT, of course you know JLPT. It has to be between like N2 and N1, but like higher end of that, seriously, minimum, in order for you to do really well in this. Yeah. When you're talking to your clients, everything's going to be in English or whatever language you speak. But when you're talking to anybody else outside of your company, that's going to be in Japanese, 100%. So get started on your Japanese studying, guys.
How did you learn Japanese?
I studied for a couple of years back home before I did my first study abroad. And I was just fortunate enough to go to a school in an area where there's nobody that could speak English, like even more so than the rest of Japan, right? And I was doing I was doing like a homestay. So I was speaking Japanese at home. I was speaking Japanese at school. I was speaking Japanese wherever I went. So total immersion. And that's how I did it. And that's honestly the best way to do it.
The best way to do it.
Yeah. And if you can't do that, just get a Japanese partner.
Alex, we talked about many topics today. Do you feel like there's something that we didn't really get into that is still interesting to bring up concerning real estate market in Japan, luxury market in Japan?
Yeah. You know, it's a very... The Japanese luxury real estate market is still very immature, right? It is changing, though. There are more and more developers that are coming into the country, and that will bring up the prices not only of those kind of properties, but other kind of properties as well. This is the first time in probably decades that Japan has actually experienced steady inflation. You know, so look, that's not going to be, the ultra luxury stuff is not going to be the reason that things are going to be going up in price, but Japan is, you know, it's a healthy economy again, at least, you know, I would say so. And I am very fortunate for that. And I think that if anybody wants to live over here, it's a great place to live. You know, we didn't really talk about that so much, just in terms of, I'm getting more and more people that are like thinking of either they have fired, right, like early retirement they've done, or regular retirement, right? And they just want to live in Japan. And yeah, that's becoming...
Does Japan have a retirement visa?
Nope. So there's ways to basically sponsor your own visa that allow you to live over here. So that's what most people end up doing. But yeah, unfortunately, there's no there's no digital nomad visa. And
they just started, right?
Kind of.
Which is being discussed as, is this a real digital nomad visa? Is it just a 2 months tourist visa on which you can work? But
it's exactly that. I mean, it's not a real digital nomad visa.
But it's a first step.
It's a first step. I mean, you know, Japan is very slow to do things in many ways, but when they do things, they do it, right? That's why, like, the planning of building a house will take you way longer than it would in the States.
But once they start building it,
It's going to be
you turn
3 or
around
4
once
months.
and it's gone. It's
up.
there. Yeah.
It's up. Yeah. So I mean, I'm sure. When did you start the building on your?
The
your
renovations
renovation
are starting next week, and they said about 2 months.
yet? That's a gut renovation, like starting from scratch, more or
We are
less.
keeping some of the you said the older wooden doors are very nice, and we do have those old
Oh,
wooden
good.
doors. So
Oh,
we're gonna
really?
keep some doors, keep the flooring in, but a little bit, some walls will have to be swapped.
But yeah, 2 months, man. 2
2 months, in and
Yeah,
out.
that's not bad. I mean, to do a new build from conception to I got the keys to the door, that'll take you 8 to 10 months, generally speaking. That is unheard of in other countries. So yeah. I don't really have anything else that I
Oh,
think we should have
Alex,
touched on. But hey,
thank you
great.
very much.
Yes, thank you
We
so much.
will make sure to link your channel, Tokyo Portfolio, your websites as well, Black Sheep Realty and Tokyo Portfolio, where people can check out and reach out if they're looking for luxury properties in Tokyo and beyond.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing all your insights.
Yeah.
This was welcoming. What am I talking about? This was Unpacking Japan. Thank you for listening.
This is two white guys with a podcast, but in Japan. So here we are.
This was Unpacking Japan. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. See you again next week. Bye.